podcast today. This is Scott Cunningham. This is the Mixtape with Scott. It's a podcast devoted to the personal stories of living economists. And it's a podcast that's meant to be an oral history, non-random, selected oral history of the economics profession over the last 50 years. And as longtime listeners know, I'm really in love with the econometricians, and I really love uh, various parts of econometrics. And this is one of the times that I'm not really interviewing people that are in the necessarily like the causal inference tradition that I'm always very interested in, but I'm also very interested in just econometricians. And I've interviewed Jeff Wooldridge, and I interviewed Bill Green, and I've interviewed people that are kind of from the more structural areas like Pecos, Chris Tabor, and so on. And so today we have the opportunity to listen to uh, a man that's at the University of Wisconsin. He's the Phillips Distinguished Chair in Economics, and I can never pronounce the first name, the Havelmo Professor of Economics, Bruce Hansen. I think Bruce Hansen actually is someone that a lot of people know a lot about because Bruce has a phenomenal new textbook, actually two new textbooks, one on econometrics and one on probability and statistics, two separate books that for a very long time were actually free textbooks that he put on his website. And when I was writing the mixtape, Bruce was someone that I really looked up to because I just would kind of observe him from afar, having this very productive, impactful career as an econometrician, and clearly caring about people learning econometrics and caring obviously about students because he would make his book free. And I thought that was really inspirational. And so today we're going to talk to Bruce, and he's going to talk us through his life story, and kind of lead into his impactful career, kind of starting out, is what happened to him at Yale University and sort of those key events, both in his life, but also at that time in econometrics, that time of history in econometrics that maybe did allow him to also be impactful. It's not always just underlying ability, but it's like underlying ability interacting with our teachers, interacting with the schools that we're at, but also interacting to things that are changing in the world at the time that you don't maybe necessarily know, but that actually end up being you're in the right place at the right time. Although maybe Bruce would have been at the right place at the right time anywhere because he's so talented. So thanks so much for tuning in to the podcast again. I'm excited to introduce you now to Bruce Hansen. I'm going to give you over to myself, Scott Cunningham, interviewing Bruce. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you right now. Okay, well, it is my pleasure today to have with me a guest that I don't think we've ever actually spoken except on Facebook. Is that right, Bruce?
I think that's correct.
I think that's right. So this is Bruce Hansen from the University of Wisconsin. Or well, shoot, I was usually going to ask. Let me take that back. Bruce, will you tell us your full title at the University of Wisconsin? And yeah, just tell us your full title.
I am I guess I'm the Phipps Endowed Professor of Economics at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, Wisconsin.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. I actually had that you were the Havelmo Professor of Economics. Is that you've already ghosted Havelmo?
No, this is complicated in the way the UW works, but there's a few titles that the Havelmo name is simply because there's a research competition where they make an award and you get to name the chair after any deceased person in your field that you choose. I picked Havelmo being one of the greatest econometricians in our history. But then more recently, I was granted an endowed professorship that one of our alumni gifted, and so that's probably a better name to use.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I actually have a discussion at Havelmo later, and I was curious
Yeah.
about I was curious about your opinion of him. So, because I had a feeling that's what it was, because Chris Tabor said he like picked Heckman. And so I was like, oh, I bet there's like a thing here, because I have a hard
Yeah,
time believing there's like a
yeah,
alumni funding a Havelmo chair. So I was like,
yeah. I don't.
wow, the Wisconsin students are very cool. All right. So, okay. Well, before we get started, I was kind of curious if you had a memory of a vacation that maybe you took as a younger person, not necessarily your favorite vacation, but a vacation that you found kind of pops up in your memories every now and then.
Sure. Then this would take us back a few years, and it doesn't have any econometrics or economics in it. I just takes me back to when I was probably around 15 or 16 years old. That probably I was a member of the Boy Scout group, and a group of us took a week-long hiking trip in the summertime in the Sierra Nevadas in California. That happened probably more than once, probably twice. And part of the reason why it's special because my father was one of the leaders who took us out. So we went out on a backpacking trip and hiked every day, stayed in
Oh,
different places, and traversed through um, the mountains. And one of the things I remember was we got caught in a rainstorm at night, and me and my fellow mate were lazy and hadn't put up our rain flies very well. And so when we got up in the morning, we had to wring out our sleeping bags because they were so
oh,
soggy wet.
oh,
That's
wow.
but that's life for a 15-year-old when you are lazy.
Yeah. Were you an Eagle Scout?
No, no, I got one thing shy of that. It wasn't important to me to finish.
Ah, okay, okay, okay. Well, that's cool. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Southern California.
Oh,
The community is named Calabasas. At
mm.
that time, it was a new community. My parents moved in, bought a new house in 1965, and at the end of the road, it was barren and rabbits and things like that. Now Calabasas is considered a ritzy community. Some
Oh,
wealthy people, famous people live in some of the hills near there. But at that time, it was I think, an inexpensive bedroom community.
oh,
But
wow.
so Southern California,
Yeah, yeah. So, how close is that to Los Angeles?
by car, half an hour if there's no traffic.
Oh, okay, okay. Wow. Huh. What was it like growing up in that little town or that little area?
Well, so, just like growing up in any suburb, and I mean, it wasn't that. We say it's not little. It's on the edge of the San Fernando Valley, so it's on the edge of a lot. But on the other side is Topanga Canyon. We were also a half hour drive from the Malibu Beach, which is pretty famous.
Uh-huh.
So it's I think pretty much like growing up for many American teenagers. I was a teenager in the late 1970s. If you see films about that era,
Yeah.
um,
That's all I was about to ask.
pretty,
It seems like, those like auteurs, the 70s, like even Spielberg, it always kind of felt like he was telling his stories in those areas. Is that right?
yeah, yeah, I think
Oh,
so.
oh,
Yeah, I
okay.
was just watching the film Licorice Pizza the other day, and that's actually set near where I lived.
Oh, wow.
And I think
Okay.
that was a Spielberg, but I'm not sure.
Oh, huh.
But I might have that wrong.
Yeah. Well, so what did your parents do for a living?
My mother ended up being a homemaker. My father was an electrical engineer
Oh,
working in an aerospace firm.
okay.
His parents were immigrants from Norway, arrived. My grandfather um, j was apparently just jumped on a ship when he was 18 years old and ended up in the United States without speaking English or having any job skills, and that but how he lived his life. And my grandmother um, washed laundry to pull them through the Great Depression.
Oh,
And so my
wow.
father was raised in Tucson, Arizona, in a very simple situation, but they were fortunate to have the University of Arizona in their backyard, so he was able to attend Arizona and got his a degree in engineering. And apparently, as soon as he graduated, he just beelined it to Los Angeles, saying that's where the jobs are.
Oh, wow. Wow. Did you have any
Um,
siblings?
I have one of two. I have a brother a year older and a sister 3 years younger. They're still around.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and
So
yeah,
so did you know your granddad? Did you know him pretty
yeah.
well?
But
Was he able to speak
he
English eventually?
yeah. My they both spoke limited English. My grandfather passed away when I was around 10, so my
Oh,
memories are more sketchy.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, so if I had found you on a Saturday, before high school, what would I have found you doing?
Before high school,
Yeah, before high school.
yeah, it's a good question. Maybe hanging out with friends, maybe doing schoolwork of one form or another. Maybe I was in the school band, so maybe I would have been playing music.
Mm.
Maybe reading. I think at that age I read a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. What kind of instrument did you play in the band?
So I played the trumpet then. And I also played the piano.
Oh, okay.
Um, I still do.
Oh, you still play the piano now? You've never put
Yeah,
it down?
but I just stopped playing the trumpet after high school.
Yeah, right. I played the saxophone, and the moment I quit, I was like, it was as though I had never learned one thing. I mean, it was, and so you played the piano your whole life?
Yeah,
You're pretty good. I guess you are pretty
I'm
good.
decent. I'm decent.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't on and off.
Oh, that's cool. Wow. I always wish I had stuck with these instruments. So, what did you want to be when you grew up, when you were sort of like at that middle school, beginning of high school era?
That was when I started getting interested in I think in political social issues.
Mm,
That I thought that I want somewhere around then I started getting very interested in modern politics, news issues, and what's going on in the world. And I guess I had the idea to go and change the world
mm.
in some way.
That was the early
Uh,
70s?
yes, I started high school, I guess 1976,
Mm,
and we all thought the world was going to explode in a nuclear holocaust.
yeah.
Um, now we have different issues. I was interested in the standard things that young people find exciting.
Right, right.
And
Did
so
you play? Go
I
ahead.
just was thinking more like kind of like not really becoming a politician. I don't really know what I wanted to do.
Yeah, but you were very motivated by these political problems at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's what I think got me interested in social science.
Mm,
That's the lever that got in is just starting to read a lot about the world and the
mm,
issues that we all see around us, poverty and global inequality.
okay, okay. Right. Oh, that's interesting. So how large was this high school that you attended in this little area?
I'm guessing 1,600 students,
Oh, okay.
but I'm
Okay.
not sure. Maybe 1,000.
So what would your teachers have said about you as a student back then if they were like to describe you to your parents or describe you to each other or something?
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure I had complete misconceptions about that. They probably would have said I was a good student,
Uh-huh.
but a bit flaky, uh,
Uh-huh.
um, not very kind of a goof off in some dimensions.
Really? That you felt like that even that you can see that now?
Well, I think then I tried to manufacture an aura of being a goof off because I wanted to countervail the this simpleness of high school.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. Well, what did you like? What you were you still kind of interested by the end of high school, mainly in this kind of political sort of, kind of stuff, or was it changing?
I think when I went off to college, I was thinking about studying political science or international relations.
Mm,
I think that was what I was. I'm pretty confident I was thinking along those lines. I don't think I knew the word economics in a serious way.
okay, so
And
it
of
didn't
course, that
show
was
up in high.
common then. There was no economics classes in schools. What we would have read about economics would have been very misleading.
Right, right, right. Sure, sure. So you go to Occidental College, a liberal arts college near where you're from, right? It wasn't that
Yeah,
far away. How come
yeah. It's
what took you to Occidental?
I think my parents pushed me to think about going to a liberal arts college as something that would be more personal,
Mm,
and going to a school in the Los Angeles area was more affordable than someplace traveling away. So I
okay.
applied to Occidental and Pomona, which is another school in the area, and then Occidental gave me a better financial deal.
Okay. Okay. Well,
So
so what was
that's
the,
yeah,
go ahead. Sorry, I keep interrupting.
that's why I picked it.
Okay. Okay. So what's Occidental like back then as a young person? What's it like when you step on campus?
It's a Yeah. In fact, I went back a few years ago. Hasn't changed that much. It's small. Um, it's not much different in size than the high school I went to.
Okay.
It Small classes. You really know all the other students around. It's pretty confining.
Was that positive or negative?
Well, at first it struck me as good. By the time I left, I thought it was not so good.
Yeah.
I thought it was too narrow. I
Dude,
I just found it a very small environment.
you said narrow. What does that mean?
Just narrow group of people and opportunities. We had a big universities, you have more opportunities for a diverse set of students to
Uh,
explore.
yeah.
Um, that so by the time, I mean, I think it was really good for my first 2 years for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. You end up double majoring in economics and philosophy. That was really kind of interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about
Yeah.
the
Technically, it
order
was
of
a
that?
single major in economics and my minor was philosophy, but I was close to a philosophy major. So how did that happen? I started getting interested in philosophy during my freshman year in college and took a lot of philosophy classes, and I thought it was very interesting because it makes you think. It makes you think about stuff.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I took more philosophy classes early on, and then I started taking the econ classes later. And I was actually playing catch up. I think I took most of the classes for the major my senior year
Oh,
at the
really?
end. Um, and but I ended up not pursuing the degree in philosophy when I started realizing that it was less leading to a career that I could pursue.
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, I remember going once to my favorite philosophy professor and saying, "I'm thinking about getting a PhD. Should I go apply for PhD programs in philosophy?" And was told, "No, that, that this would not." I don't know if I was being told no for me
Right.
or no in general,
Yeah.
and maybe it was no for me, but I was told that bluntly, there's 5 positions a year in the profession. If
Yeah.
you're not one of the absolute stars, you're not going to get a job, and so that's
Right.
just not a wise choice.
Right.
And I would
Right.
say the same thing to people today. Difference with econ where um, it's not that it's easy to get a job, but there are jobs.
Right. 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 Well, so what's this moment where you first take an economics class and how come you took one?
Yeah, so one of the things I started realizing, I can't say exactly what the so my first econ class I took as a sophomore, but why what this transition per se was, but I started realizing that for me, that the study of political science was a study of the institutions and how things get through the system, but the study of economics was a study more of the impact of the policies themselves and what
Mm,
happens to the world. And I started realizing that for me, I was more interested in the impact of the policies than in the political process by how it's decided. So I quickly abandoned this idea of political science or anything like that. And I found that economics, and then I took economics, and then I found it to be easy
uh-huh.
and natural. And then I was kind of flabbergasted at some point. I was taking, I guess, intermediate micro, and I realized a lot of my classmates found it hard
Oh,
that, how do you solve these models? And other students found it challenging. And I guess it's for many of us who pursue the PhD, it's that we found it a straightforward discipline
mm,
because there's a set of rules, you solve them, and you come to interesting conclusions.
right. Right. So you didn't have a math background and you find these
No,
models very easy to work with. That's interesting.
No, I made the silly decision when I entered college to stop studying math because I thought I was more interested in the real world.
Oh,
So I took the minimum amount of math. I just took one calculus class
so it
to
wasn't
fulfill the
the
requirements.
mathematics. It wasn't the mathematics that made all of this super easy. It was something else about just the overall intuition or something like
Yeah.
that.
I have always had a math aptitude, so I always found the math easy.
Okay, got it. Got it.
But to get through the college level economics at that time, you didn't really need much out of calculus. If you knew how to take a derivative, that was good enough,
Right, right. So
and so
you
that
had
was sufficient.
a professor that kind of was influential because you ultimately do this PhD. So I mean, was there anybody at Occidental that was making an impression on you?
There was a variety of professors I talked to, but the one I was, um, um, but no one really pushed me in a particular way to get a PhD or anything else. Um, that but when it was time for me to think about getting a PhD, I did talk to a number of professors, and I remember going to one person's office, and I've actually used the same stunt on future students. He says, "Okay, let me show you about economics," and he goes over to the shelf and pulls off an issue of Econometrica. I believe
Mhm.
it was Econometrica, and he opens up to a random page. Says, "See, look at this. This is what you have to read and be able to do if you're going to be an economist. So go bone up on some math."
Oh, really? He tells you that.
Yeah.
Are you do so? Do you end up doing that?
Well, this was my senior year when I was thinking about applying for PhDs, probably at the end of my senior year. And so, in fact, what I did is I didn't go straight for a PhD program. I worked for 1 year in a commercial bank. And during that year, I applied for PhD programs. And I also took two night courses, extension courses, well, not night courses at UCLA. Um, one in multivariate calculus and one in I guess linear algebra.
Okay. Okay. Did you notice when you took those classes, you were like, yeah, this math aptitude might go a lot further than I thought it did.
Um, I'm not sure. These courses were pretty simple because they're not aimed at math majors,
Ah.
and so it was pretty elementary.
Mm,
I again, yeah, I never found. I mean, I did a bunch of stunts in college. I like when I took econometrics, there was a requirement that um a prerequisite you have to have statistics, just like we do today. And
mhm.
somehow I bullshitted my way out of having that prerequisite. I had not had statistics even. So I
Yeah.
took the econometrics. And then afterwards, the professor or someone came to me and says, "Bruce, in order to get the degree in econ, you have to have a stats class. And I thought you had it when you enrolled, but somehow it's not on your record." I said,
Yeah.
"Oh, really? What do I do now?" I said, "Why don't you go talk to a stats professor?" So I talked to a stats professor who was teaching the class, and I said, "Can I just take the final exam? And if I get a passing grade, then I kind of place out of this requirement."
Yeah.
And this is, I guess, the benefit of going to small school. They said, "Sure." So he just handed me the final exam. I took it, and I think I got like 90% or something. And so they just passed me out of the degree. And so I had just sat down and read through the textbook, like in an afternoon.
Yeah. That sounds efficient. That sounds like an efficient
I
approach
mean,
to
these
the.
undergrad stats classes at the time were pretty darn simple.
Uh-huh. Right. Right.
But
Right.
it's kind of embarrassing now because if a student came to me today, I would hang them up by the thumbnails if they try to pull that stunt.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Do as I say, not what I did.
Yeah.
Well, so how quickly do you end up going to get your doctorate? Is it immediate or you do a little
Yeah.
delay?
So I worked for 1 year and then I applied for PhD programs and I entered the following year. So it was 1 year out of college.
So when was that?
And
That would have been early 80s, mid
I
80s,
entered in 1985.
85.
And I went to Yale.
Right, right, right. So was it Yale like the typical way they tell you apply to everywhere, you go to the best school, or was there like you had a sense that it might be a really uniquely good fit?
So I applied to 6 schools. I got into two, Berkeley and Yale. And Berkeley gave me a good financial deal, and Yale did not. But Yale was outside of California,
Oh,
so I
okay.
went to Yale.
So you went to Yale, right? Right. Okay. Well, so
Um,
you stepped foot at Yale. Uh, um, what happened? What's it like when you step foot there? You haven't been out of California. You're now in this distinguished PhD program at Yale. What happens? What's it like?
for me, it was a transformation, complete
Uh,
transformation, because I think in my college years I didn't really learn economics. I
mm,
learned upward sloping supply and downward sloping demand. I learned linear regression, but um, not to really understand it. And suddenly I was in a place where they took economics seriously,
mm,
and not just as a set of rules, but of thinking deeply about how it works. And so for me, going to a PhD program was completely transformatory in everything, in micro, macro, econometrics, everything. And
mm,
it was just a wonder.
mm.
For me, I hadn't been in an environment where research was done. And so I always thought of this knowledge as a set of established tools, not as
Uh-huh.
something that's in progress.
Oh.
So from the day one, I just found it just eye-opening, wonderful intellectual experience.
Mm, mm.
And so I just loved it. I really just fell in love with the whole idea of scholarly research in general and economics as well, just from the moment I walked into the door at Yale.
Hmm. Hmm. So, so like, what's an example of like an intellectual experience that happened that you sort of can tell was kind of transformative as a student?
Well, the most transformative thing probably for my career was in the spring semester. I took linear regression from Peter Phillips, who ended up being my PhD advisor. And he was the most extraordinary teacher, lecturer imaginable. And everyone talks about this. He would teach without lecture notes and would just fly around the board with his chalk and
Mm.
proving theorem after theorem faster than anyone could possibly comprehend. And his intellectual energy and enthusiasm for the subject was captivating.
Mm.
It was a very popular class among the PhD students. And at that time, it was just the linear regression model in amazing detail.
Oh, yeah. So it was your first econometrics class or it was a later
Yeah,
one?
the fall class, which was taught by Donald Andrews, was probability and statistics,
Mm.
uh, which was which was a class, but I wouldn't have called that transformative for my energy level.
But it was the econometrics class. Before you took that econometrics class, were you kind of open-minded to where you might be going?
I
For
still, even as I ended my second year in the PhD, I was still thinking about maybe doing something else. I started graduate school thinking I'd be studying development, and then I
Mm.
switched over to thinking I might do macroeconomics.
Mm.
And I was still thinking about developing a dissertation in macro as a second year student. I
Mm.
think somewhere in the middle of my second year, I realized I'd probably be doing econometrics.
Second year after you took
Yeah.
Peter Phillips class?
So in the second year, we had a second an advanced class in econometrics in the fall that Don and Peter taught.
Mm.
And at some point, Peter pulled me into his office and um, handed me an econometrics problem and said, "Go solve this."
Uh-huh.
And it had to do with instrumental variables in a unit root setting.
Uh,
And so he was trying to loop me into being a research student.
did you solve it?
Yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
was like a weekend project, and then it didn't amount to anything.
Mm.
But eventually, it led into our joint research paper.
Oh, okay. Okay. So when do you start to feel like, when do you start to feel like, econometrics is, or what did you feel? Did you feel like you loved econometrics or did you find it easy or what is it that's like driving this sorting into it?
Yeah, it's a good question about why, because I could imagine have gone into another area of economics, but I was having trouble thinking of good research topics in other areas, and it would seem just easier for me to come up with research topics in econometrics. So um, perhaps it was a combination of being in an environment with Phillips at the time when he was such a generator of ideas. and maybe I just gravitated towards the method of thinking that it became natural. And so, but once that kind of that hump got over, then it just was self-fulfilling because
Hmm.
um, you kind of fell in love with the method of thinking and solving the problems and no turning back.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so what kind of stuff are you and Phillips working on as a grad student?
So the problem in the air at the time that he was interested in was the model of linear co-integration between non-stationary time series,
Hmm.
and the whole distribution theory for that type of econometrics was wide open and unknown.
Oh,
And there was a known problem that if you regress one non-stationary time series on another, that the least squares estimator had a bias due to when there were kind of a simultaneity between the errors in the two in the two variables, a
hmm.
bias, and then the asymptotic distribution was
Hmm.
non-standard. So Peter came to me and said, you know, the traditional. So then he did this other thing. He calls me into the office one day and says, you know, here's the solution, possibly. The traditional in econometrics solution to endogeneity is instrumental variables. So what if we use another non-stationary instrumental variable? What would be the distribution if we do that?
Huh.
So he had this style. He just talked to you for 1 minute. Probably it's not 1 minute, but it was a short period and like lay out the basic ideas. And then I got my marching orders. I went off and worked out all the details of the first draft. And we found some surprising results
Huh.
that, for example, the instrument could be completely independent of the regressors and the method still works,
Yeah.
which is kind of bizarre.
Uh-huh.
Uh, it didn't turn into a methodology that was productive. No one uses this technique, but
Hmm.
instead, I realized that you could do something like a GLS transformation to the model. Um, when you write it down as a system, if you write down the structural equation of interest and the driving equation of the regressors, view it as a system and do it kind of like a GLS transformation,
Hmm.
that then the estimator that comes out of that cleans out the endogeneity problem, and
Hmm.
then the estimator has an asymptotic normal distribution,
Wow.
and that then we put it was put into our joint paper that had this instrumental variable idea and this idea that Peter then coined the name fully modified least squares.
Oh.
And that is our joint paper. It was published in Review of Economic Studies back in 1990. That was my first paper together.
Oh,
My
wow.
first published paper. And
That was your job market paper?
that ended up being not my job market paper, no. Um, but it's uh, very highly cited paper
Oh,
because of this impact on the co-integration literature. Um,
huh.
that's a long time ago.
But that's interesting that it would be so why wouldn't it not, given the popularity of IV, why do you think it's highly cited but then doesn't end up getting used? I would think that
Yeah.
would be
Sorry,
correlated.
there's two techniques. There's the IV method and this fully modified idea, and they're both in the same paper. The IV method isn't used because it turns out that in this co-integration setting, it doesn't really help them. It's not really a helpful way of getting rid of the endogeneity.
Oh,
Instead, you really want to view the equations as a system and do this transformation taking account of the system. So it's really not it's not an IV solution. It's more like a GLS solution,
oh,
and
okay.
that turned out to be more popular. That second idea ended up being more popular.
I
Even then, it's
see.
not that popular, I think, in that literature. Instead, people move to system vector autoregression as
Okay.
being the most dominant method.
Okay. Okay. So are you producing econometrics like that you would say is like primarily useful for micro or primarily useful for macro, or is it just very, very general in terms of its,
Yeah.
contribution usefulness?
Well, in my early days, I started off being viewed as a time series econometrician because of my collaboration with Peter Phillips and this work in co-integration and some other papers. But then over time, my work ended up being less involved in time series and more involved in other areas of
Mm,
econometrics. I think um, I've made contributions to quite a number of disparate areas, so I don't see myself having a particular categorization. A lot of my work has been on model selection, model averaging. I've worked in non-parametrics and shrinkage estimation. I
mm,
Some of my most cited papers have to do with nonlinear threshold models, models with threshold uh, crossing
mm,
um, things, and like the most cited paper there is for panel data.
mm,
The biggest impact I've had there is a nonlinear threshold model for panel data. It's I kind of didn't realize how important that was when I worked on it, but that paper's had a huge impact on applied work
mm,
in panel data. I guess one of the things, so I'm kind of jumping up here, but one of the things that's kind of driven the way I like to think about econometric work that I do has always been trying to motivate on what applied people need. And
mm,
so I've always tried to focus on what methods actually will be used. A lot of
mm,
econometric theory that gets published in the top journals never is used by applied audience, and so
mm.
gets minimal amount of citations.
Oh,
I've always tried to think about whether or not the technique will be used or not. Not You can't always be successful in that. Sometimes your favorite ideas no one cares about.
mm.
But it seems to be senseless to work on techniques that will, in the end, just sit in the theory journal.
Why do you think you're like that? Is that strategic or is that a natural part of your personality?
It could be part of my personality. It also just the influence of talking with other people in the econometrics profession, hearing
Mm,
the skeptic. Sometimes, ever since I started, I've always heard the skepticism that, oh, econometric theory is useless, that no one really cares, or that there's a separation between applied and theory. Uh, People always are saying that, and it's always a caricature, a straw man. The
yeah,
fact is that there's always the people who care about actually having an impact.
right.
Um, and um,
So
so
how did you go about that? How did you go about sort of figuring out they need this? It's kind of, I mean, there's a lot of time and attention that you would have to devote to that, right?
Yeah, it's easy to say, it's hard to do. It's like when the students come to you early on and they say, "So how do I start a research project?" And then
Right.
I turn around and say, "Well, what are you interested in?"
Right.
There's no there's no way to tell someone how to start a research project. So if you start out by saying you need to do something that's relevant, um, how do you do that? So I think what I did is, as an assistant professor, I attended lots of applied workshops in economics. I just I just sat down and read through the top journals as they came out. I attended a lot of workshops and just tried to pay attention to what was going on in applied economics.
Mm,
So that was the 1990s,
mm.
roughly speaking. The world's changed a lot since then, but that was roughly starting the beginning of the data revolution, where
Oh,
economics. See, back when I was in grad school, I would say back in the 1980s, economics was more theoretical,
right.
that people would solve models, come up with some partial derivatives, and say, look, taxes cause this to happen, tariffs
Yeah,
cause this to happen. And data sets were limited.
right.
And then in the 90s, things started to switch, and somewhere around 2000 or so, suddenly we had this data explosion where everyone has big data sets, lots of data. Now the journals are swimming with data applications.
Right. Right. So that's really interesting. That would be something that would increase the demand for econometrics potentially is just the availability of data. And did you feel that in the air?
Yeah, no, you really
Huh.
see it. And I think I'm slow on the uptake.
Uh-huh.
but I see maybe others are even more slow. But the what I see is what's going on in the applied world is light years ahead of what's going on in econometric methodology, because the econometricians are always trying to um, work things out in careful detail. But when you do applied work, you just want to get it done.
Right.
And so people would just go and say, I'm going to work out this model that has these complex dependence, network structure, um, etc. But in econometric methodology, we have no idea about the right way to do things.
Right. Right.
So we're playing catch up.
Oh, oh. But that also might raise the marginal value of the work because there's obviously built up demand for all those things already.
I think so. I
Yeah.
think so. It's just that oftentimes it's hard to develop methods that reach all the needs that practitioners need.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so
People have complicated models.
you end up at Rochester in 89. And I mean, I don't want to, make you uncomfortable in the sense of like flattering you, but you get tenure, it looks like 3 years later.
Actually, it was untenured associate.
Oh, untenured associate. Okay. Okay. But
But
but was that still kind of, was that standard at Rochester or was that still
no,
oh, okay. So there was kind of this, I wrote
it
here,
was
it seemed
it
like
was an early promotion.
it was an early promotion. So it sounds like you hit the ground running. Like you sort of
Yeah.
were, why do you think why was that? Is that your ability or is that something with something else that just made you so well prepared for when you hit assistant?
Yeah. Well, yeah, yeah, you don't want to embarrass me, but I went into graduate school. So I went into graduate school completely unprepared, knowing nothing.
Yeah.
Uh, I during graduate school, for example, I sat down and read Rudin's Principles of Analysis just so I
Uh-huh.
could learn analysis, right?
Yeah.
Uh, But then I finished grad school in 4 years,
Uh-huh.
and which would seem kind of weird today.
Even back then, that's very fast, right?
Yeah, that was a
Mode
bit
would
on
have
the
been
fast
5.
side.
Yeah.
And so I started at my job in 1989, and then I think in 1992 and I was publishing like 6 papers a year,
Unreal.
like my wife laughs about the time that I wrote a paper over a weekend.
These are pure econometric theory papers.
Well, that is actually a note I published in Econometrica
Wow.
on hack estimation.
It seems
I
like the
just like
notes
got an
in
idea. I just wrote it down and just sent it. I would do things stupid. I would do really stupid things. I would sit down to get ideas, write them up, send them to journals the next day.
well, but it sounds like you had the ability to write a manuscript and do the work
Yeah.
really fast. You had a good sense of what the
Yeah.
structure was.
And the style was different then. The style was simpler. Now people, when we write papers, expect them to be more thorough and detailed and
Mm,
500 pages long.
mm. It must have still, I mean, what was it like as an econometrician getting these econometricas back then? Is it the same kind of feeling you think now? I mean, those are just, such like such uniquely amazing experiences. Was it just like that for you back then?
Yeah, it was very hard to, I mean, most of my submissions to Econometrica were rejected, and it's always has been very hard,
Mm-hmm.
and always been a sense that the referees are really, really top notch and thorough and unimpressed.
Right, 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 right. So when I ask you how come you hit the ground running, part of it sounds like you just were the way your brain worked, it was really a perfect for that time. What is it about it though? You just sort of you had the ability to spot a problem and you had the ability to solve it and knew how to write a paper?
Yeah, I think in the night. So one way I see things is that there was a real revolution in econometrics in the 1980s.
Oh,
Roughly speaking, before 1980, we were very old school. Everything was just linear algebra and simple. But then in the 1980s, we had this huge revolution of bringing in the nonlinear estimators and semi-parametrics and non-parametrics.
uh-huh.
And what you see is a shift of that. Most people, when I was new PhD, so people who were over like 40, 45 years old were doing completely useless work to a large
Mm,
extent that most of the older generation were had old skills and they couldn't modernize. But now if you
mm.
look today, it's not the case that the older generation are useless. People like Whitney Newey or Don Andrews or stuff are still doing exciting work because the tools that they developed in the 1980s are still alive today. It's just that
Oh,
we've stepped up, but the basic revolution in the skill set, I think occurred in the 1980s.
huh,
So I was in grad school at just the right time when suddenly we transitioned from this kind of low-tech econometrics
huh,
to the modern set of skills.
huh,
And so any of us who were kind of got trained in econometrics late 1980s and on are still conversant with what's going on, or can be still conversant with what's going on. But it ends up being that therefore in the 1990s there was just a huge amount of work that was easy to do.
huh.
It was just easy to make contributions then. I think it's much harder now.
Uh-huh. Wait, so are there some key drivers, some key people that are kind of laying down this new architecture that's got this widespread influence?
Well, I think that the lot of the work in econometrics in the 1980s was driven by some very key people: Hal White,
Oh,
Lars Hansen, Donald Andrews, Whitney
mm,
Newey, Jim Powell,
mm,
and then in the time series world, people like Peter Phillips and Mark Watts and Jim Stock,
mm.
Chris Sims. So there were a number of people who were um, bringing the profession forward in a dramatic way. And I'm sure I'm missing a lot of names there, but
Yeah.
the
And
style of
you're
the work,
drinking from the source by being
yeah,
Peter's student. So
yeah,
you're in a great position to kind of see this landscape that you could immediately start contributing to.
yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but it was important then to really be at a top school where you could
Mm.
work with one of the few people, the very few people kind of really pushing things out.
Wow. 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 That's really cool. So when you go up for tenure, this kind of I think correlated with what you're saying. At least sometimes at least how I think, you go up for tenure, you have to try to explain your professional identity, not just explain your papers, but like, who am I? Because you got all these colleagues that are voting and they're not necessarily econometricians. And so everybody's got to kind of explain who Bruce Hansen is to each other, both the letter writers and yourself. So what would they have said back then? Like, who are you? What kind of economist are you?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I remember seeing this once written up in one of those NSF referee reports where people are really talking less about the specific proposal than they're talking about you as a scholar. And someone wrote up that I was someone who works on technically hard I forgot exactly how they phrased it, but technically hard econometric problems. So that's how I
Oh,
was characterized in the 1990s, was that I tried to work on things that were viewed as hard statistical, hard technical problems
do you feel like that's
for that
true?
era.
Did you
Sorry?
feel did you feel like that was
Yeah, I
how
think I
you are?
gravitated towards the harder the things that were viewed at the time as harder problems.
Oh,
Now the things that were viewed as harder are now viewed as standard.
uh-huh.
Uh,
Right.
Now
Right.
what's hard is really hard.
Well, so you said earlier, you said Havelmo was one of the greatest or the greatest econometrician in history. And I'm just kind of curious a little bit about what is it about Havelmo that's really always kind of made that impression on you?
What makes the impression for me about Halvamol, and I might not be 100% right that he was the only person here, but he put us on a probabilistic foundation
Mm,
that it's a transition of going from econometrics to think from algebra that looks at sample means and regressions to thinking about economic model as coming from a probability mechanism.
uh-huh.
So I'm not just fitting y's on x's, but I'm thinking of that the errors are stochastic. I'm thinking of y as stochastic.
Mm-hmm.
And
Hmm.
that intellectual viewpoint now dominates the way we always think about econometric estimation. Everyone always thinks about that it's stochastic. The data is coming from a stochastic mechanism of some form or another,
Uh-huh.
and that you have to take that seriously when you think about doing learning and inference
Mm-hmm.
on the model.
Mm. Did you
I
get
mean,
that
the
in
one
graduate
exception
school?
might be like some calibration literature or something, but
Yeah, right, right. Well, that's a great pivot now to talking about your some more of your research because you have these two textbooks that just came out in 2022, and one of them is probability and the other is econometrics. So it's kind of interesting you said that because you've clearly committed to this like complete marriage of the two such that you write these two massive books on it. Can you tell me a little bit about the history of those books?
yeah, in fact, so I can advertise since we you mentioned I
Yeah,
have them on my desk. Whoa, they don't come up with my thing here, but
there it is.
so the history of the books is that I started when I started teaching at Wisconsin when I came here in 1998. I was writing up lecture notes for my course, and at some point, a student said, "You know, you should write that into a textbook." And I said,
Uh-huh.
"Yeah, right." And slowly working on those lecture notes year after year, building it, becoming more and more thorough. At one point, I said, I just have to bite the bullet and make it into a professional textbook. And
Yeah.
then at that point, I worked on it full time for a while, and that was a huge amount of work.
Yeah.
And that became this big thick um, um, volume.
Yeah.
And then I was assigned to teach once again the fall class in our program, which we recovered probability and statistics, where we
Uh-huh.
had been using the basic statistics textbooks. And I realized that it's just not written for economists.
Uh-huh.
And I realized that
Mm.
I wanted to write up lecture notes that were more geared to the way most economists think about probability and statistics.
Right.
And I just wrote that up from the get-go. And so once I realized that, I realized I should write that up as a companion textbook. And that was much easier to write. So this book on probability and statistics, much thinner, was a very quick write-up because it's not so thought-provoking. It's just writing up what we do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty happy with that as it's pretty non controversial,
Uh-huh.
but
Well, how
it provides the foundation. Not some econometrics programs people want to jump right into econometrics,
right.
assuming that everyone knows probability and statistics beforehand. But a
Yeah.
lot of programs people like to have a formal course in probability and statistics so that all the students can come up to the same level.
Yeah, I think we had an Amemia book for our probability and statistics class. Would you say that this book sort of has like a tradition in economics of writing these probabilities and probability stats books?
There's a number of good people who have written this book over here. Amamiya, Ron Gallant, Oliver Linton. There's a number of people who have written up exactly this for the same market niche.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that the one difference is I wrote mine up with a more of an economics focus,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
but it's not fundamentally different.
Yeah. Well, what about your economics book? There's also like, Wooldridge and then there's, Cameron and Trivedi and there's Bill Green and there's this bundle of traditional econometrics books, but clearly you wouldn't have written a book that big if you didn't feel like there was this missing book. So
Yeah,
what's the missing
yeah.
book that you wrote?
Well, it's mostly competitive, perhaps in style with Bill Green's book, and that is in like eighth edition or something. It's very old, that's pretty
And
outdated.
I interviewed him and he said that's it. He's not doing it anymore.
Yeah,
Right.
so that I don't think there's any question, but that's a dated thing. I think Jeff Wooldridge's book is aimed at a more narrow in some dimensions and more advanced in other dimensions, and
Yeah.
it's also like 20 years old now.
Right. Right.
That's, I love Jeff's writing. He is phenomenal.
Hmm.
Cameron and Trivedi is aimed at a more in a way more advanced, but more narrow focus.
Oh,
So, just microeconometrics. It's not as theoretical. I think what I've tried to do in my book is cover all bases. It focuses on the core traditional models in econometrics, and then has a lot of modern topics in econometrics. I try to, in some ways, it's still very old-fashioned that it takes a traditional approach to
Yeah.
econometric modeling.
Uh-huh.
Um, and despite being a thousand pages long, it doesn't cover topics that everyone's interested in. It
Uh-huh.
still focuses on core issues.
Oh, so I
And
mean,
I can't make it longer. It's just like, this is
yeah, that's right. You'll get
it's too
hurt.
long.
Yeah, you get hurt carrying it. Well, okay, that's really helpful. So you keep saying it's not as advanced. It's more like Bill Green. So it's like, should I be so the ideal audience, who is the ideal professor and who is the ideal student for this book?
Well, I wrote the book intending for first year PhD economics
Oh,
students.
okay. Okay.
For the first year, that's we're exactly the level we teach. There are
Yeah,
a lot of things in it that are more now for many first year PhD students, they'll consider it too advanced.
I
That
did well. Okay.
But that's you always can pick and choose with a textbook.
Yeah.
But I'm getting a lot of emails from people who are using it in undergraduate instruction.
Oh,
That
really?
they're
Wow.
using it for advanced econometrics classes. Uh,
Um,
and I get other contacts, people saying they're using it in master's levels um, econometrics classes. And that would be
oh,
a reasonable thing um, to do as well, just as you might use Bill Green's book for a master's level
yeah, right.
econometrics.
Right.
The audience would need to be conversant with linear algebra, obviously.
Yeah,
So the way we teach undergraduate econometrics does not use linear algebra, which
right.
maybe that's a mistake, but that that audience would not be appropriate. The other audience you mentioned, researchers, I think the book is useful for anyone who is a research economist who wants to have an up-to-date reference on a lot of methods.
Yeah, yeah. But when I wrote my book, I was really looking up to you for a lot of reasons, but one of them was that your books were free for a while. You used to have them as PDFs on your
Yeah.
website. It went through like a lot of editions before you actually
Yeah.
published it.
That's because it took me, well, it was taking me forever to finish it. And while I was trying to finish it, I didn't want people not to have it available. I
Yeah,
was torn on the issue of publishing it, making it less available in a way that versus free. I also though realized that having it simply free on my own personal website, a lot of people didn't know it existed. It really does curtail the market expanse.
mm,
So it has its pluses and minuses. The
right.
one minus that I'm less excited about is that in developing countries, young students will find that the price of this
Yeah,
book is unattainable, and
yeah.
that is unfortunate.
It's hard to figure out the price discrimination for a book, obviously, because it'll have arbitrage stuff. But like, yeah, I totally get that. And that's kind of the tragedy, I feel like, of the way that America is kind of the center for a lot of econometrics, and then Europe second, and then it just is it's like slower to get to certain places. And I bet the price of books is probably not trivial. Well, I wanted to talk about something too. You had a lot of buzz, I think, about this econometrica from 2022, a modern Gauss-Markov theorem. And, I think I think it has a lot of buzz because everybody knows if you're a PhD economist and even an undergrad that takes it, the Gauss-Markov assumptions might be the only thing some people even remember. It's like because they might not go into econometrics, but they had to go through those theorems really closely. For the sake of the listener, can you sort of tell me about this paper? Where did it come from, and why do you think it makes such a relevant contribution?
Well, it came from that I put the result in this textbook. I've been
Oh,
thinking about this for a long time. Gary Chamberlain had challenged me to think about the finite sample efficiency issue of efficiency once when we were in a conversation, and eventually I'd worked on it slowly, trying to improve that section of my textbook. I put
mm,
it in, and then my colleague Jack Porter turned to me, he said, "I can't believe it. I was reading this part of your current version, and you have this amazing result. Where did that come from?" I said, "Well, it's just, That's just the way it is. It says you got to publish this. I
Huh.
said, you sure? And so I send it off to Econometrica, and indeed people take it surprisingly. So what is the issue? It's that we typically teach that least squares is blue, the best linear unbiased estimator. And what I
Yeah.
show is that at least in the context of independent samples, it's the best unbiased estimator, that the restriction to the class of linear, meaning linear and y, is unnecessary.
Huh.
It's so we should stop teaching blue. Literally should stop teaching blue. We should teach that the sample mean is the best unbiased estimator. The
Oh,
least squares estimator is the best unbiased estimator. There's no
wow.
reason to. The only reason for linearity is to make the proof easy. We all
Is
know
that
that
right?
the proof is really easy under linearity, but it's
Uh-huh.
so silly. What's the reason that we would say that we look among linear estimators? It's intellectually silly.
Uh-huh. This is
Um,
your approach. This is your attraction to these guys saying Bruce Hansen in the 90s is somebody who works on hard technical problems. Is that like part of this? You're sort of Chamberlain challenges you, and it was a hard technical proof to kind of work through this?
yeah, I mean, the math at the end is really easy, but it was conceptually coming up with an approach to solve it. Because this is something that like Chamberlain, yeah, this is something that Whitney Newey had worked on, that Gary Chamberlain worked on.
Yeah.
Um, this is a core idea that goes back ages,
Huh.
and once you state it, it seems like obvious.
Huh.
But um, I mean, part of it, of course, maybe so you say everyone comes away from undergraduate econometrics, that's all they remember.
Uh-huh.
But in some fundamental sense, it's not really important. I mean, who
Right.
really cares?
It's that
But
acronym.
but people teach the blue assumptions.
Yeah, right, 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 right. Yeah. Well, BUE is not going to roll off the tongue as easily as blue.
Yeah, yeah, and this is true.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny in the econometrica of the abstract, you say we can drop the label linear estimator from the pedagogy of Gauss-Markov. I thought that was interesting that you put pedagogy in it and you just said quit teaching it. Is it true that I guess, I mean, if you wrote a textbook, this does seem true, but I'm just kind of interested. It sounds like the teaching of econometrics and not just the econometrics, they're like separately important to you. Is that right?
Well, it's just that I don't think that the blue concept has any impact on the way we do econometrics.
Oh,
That it's only the way we teach it. Now, maybe
oh,
in the sense that it goes. There's a question of the core question is what is the best estimator in a certain context. So it's semi-parametric efficiency bound, and it is providing a lens into how to think about semi-parametric efficiency bounds, and
mm-hmm.
therefore saying this is, but it doesn't, in a linear regression model, we're still going to estimate by least squares. It doesn't
Right,
change that. In
right.
fact, the editor who handled this, Guido Mbens, who also you've interviewed,
Yeah.
in his cover letter to me says he was very surprised that he would ever publish a paper that has no practical application.
Huh.
I forgot
Huh.
exactly the way he phrased it, but he was just saying that his intention as Econometrica editor was only to publish things that had practical implications, and this paper has none.
And
But
yet he loved it. And yet he
yeah,
thought
and
it
he
was
said,
really
but it's an
important.
obvious publication, and
Uh-huh.
so he was trying to give a type of compliment in a way
Yeah.
of saying that um, in this case it was something he thought should be published.
Well, it's funny then that you didn't see that it should be published. Jack Porter sees that you should be published. So has this been, and now it seems obvious, I mean, by the that it's going to be very impactful, but has it surprised you that there was this potential for the paper? Because you just kind of had it in the book as a proof.
Well, I mean, once it's kind of, yeah, I know it. Well, to publish it, I had to pump it
Really
up and
change it.
make it
Yeah, yeah,
make it
yeah.
more rigorous in a way. But
Right.
I don't expect this paper to get many citations. because it's not going to change the way anyone does econometric research.
Got it.
But
Got it.
what
'Cause-
I'm hoping for is that it changes the way people teach the subject.
So is that the case? The driver of econometric citations is the applied people as opposed to the econometricians? That's really the fuel that pushes these citations up?
In general, but in this particular case, I don't think it'll be cited by theorists because it's not going to change the way anyone writes a theory paper.
I got
So
you.
you can get citations two ways. One is impacting other econometric methodologists and theorists, but you get much bigger set of citations by changing the way people do applied work. Some of the most insightful papers in econometric theory have a modest level of citations but they're cited by very smart people in smart papers.
Right.
But the biggest citation, like historically, maybe the most cited papers are both.
Yeah.
I remember it used to be the case the most cited paper was Hal White's papers.
I was just about to think
Hal's
that.
White paper on heteroscedasticity.
Yeah.
Because everyone was using it.
Yeah. But then that paper becomes like Kleenex or Xerox. It's like you don't even cite it anymore because it's just like standardized. You just kind of do it. The robust header. Yeah. Well, so I sometimes ask my guests, if you could go back in time and talk to your old self when he was a student or maybe an assistant professor, are there things that he thought was important that you would sort of wish you could tell him more about? Or are there things maybe he didn't see that you wish you could tell him something about? And I ask it both because I'm curious what you're going to say, but I'm also asking it because obviously there's a bunch of people that are that young person right now. And so I'm just kind of curious, what was it that you've sort of now think about that you think, I did not think about that correctly back then, or I didn't even know about it back then, that you think is really important as your career progressed?
Yeah, it's a hard question because it's hard to run the world. But I wouldn't have done too much differently.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I can say simple things like I should have studied more broadly or learned more things and paid more attention to things I didn't know about. But the fact was that you only have a finite amount of time. What else can you learn? Like I've sometimes had regret that I didn't study more mathematics early on. I became my one mistake early on was that because I started getting in this more political interest, I stopped studying math, and then I had to pick it up later.
Right.
So I would have been better off if I had taken more math classes as a young person.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's kind of funny that orientation towards the real world. And, then you're going to econometrics, which is you go into pure theoretical econometrics, you would think, well, I don't see the connection, but you kept saying you've always been doing econometrics that was practically useful for the real world. So it's kind of like you never really you didn't seem like you really ever lost that core pull towards helping people in the real world. Is that true? You feel like that's
in a way, except that I'm not working on trying to solve the problem of poverty.
That's true. Yeah, sure. But somebody reading it, somebody using you is though.
That's the hope. That's the hope.
That's great. Well, it's really so nice to meet in person. I really appreciate you being on the podcast and letting me hear your story. It's been really nice.
Well, thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. Well, you have a great day and a great rest of the week.
You too.
Well, it's the end of the week, but have a great day.
Okay, thanks. Bye.